The Australian's Hedley Thomas is in Hong Kong and he joins me now. Hedley, thank you so much for your time. Terrific article in the Australian today, very thought-provoking. What is the first? Let's start with the protests. What is the latest today, particularly with the 100 to 200 protesters still barricaded inside a Hong Kong university, surrounded by police trying to get them out?
Yeah, hi Andrew, thank you for having me. The situation is still very fluid, Andrew. Last night, the married quarters of the police, where they live with their wives and children, was attacked by a petrol bomb-wielding group of protesters. They've done this before in the married quarters, so effectively attempting to murder police. Today, there are still a hardcore of quite radical protesters determined to sit it out, it seems. At Chinese University, police sources have said today that several thousand petrol bombs, a bomb production line, was seized and the bombs defused. There have been random attacks and wanton widespread destruction. And I do take issue with some of your comments in relation to the violence and the shooting of a protester by police. I've watched very closely with a senior lawyer and a senior former Hong Kong police officer that footage, frame by frame, and it's very clear that that officer was being assailed by a number of protesters. They had a very deliberate attempt to disarm him and seize his revolver. And I think that the protesters are very fortunate that only one of them was shot. It could have been a much worse situation as they were going for his gun.
I should actually explain, I'm not sure you saw the footage we had. There actually been two protesters shot, and I take your point very much on one of them, which I think is the other one I did not show. That was indeed, I think, as you quite rightly described. But while I've talked before about the violence of the police, the beatings, etc., the violence by the protesters now, I think, is becoming a real issue. How worried are locals that you've spoken to?
Well, they've been deeply concerned for some time, but they're also worried about retribution. There's no doubt that a very large section of the Hong Kong public has supported the protesters. Initially, the protests, the marches were non-violent, very peaceful, a massive turnout of people, office workers and students and even many public servants and some journalists. But since then, there has been a descent into chaos and lately into mob rule. And the protesters have intimidated and frightened many Hong Kong people into silence. They don't want to speak out about what they're so fearful of because they'll get beaten up. The protesters are actually violently assaulting people who challenge them. If you are not with them, then you are an enemy, and they will retaliate, as you have seen with the footage, that horrific footage of that man being ignited. And I think that footage should be shown, because if it's good enough to show the footage of alleged brutality by the police, why shouldn't we be showing what these protesters who are going under this so-called noble cause banner are doing in retaliation in lighting a civilian after throwing lighter fluid over him? The man has got critical burns. He has been severely burnt, and it was just a horrific spectacle. But so much of this kind of conduct has been glossed over, I think, very misleadingly by sections of the media, particularly the international media, which has wanted to characterise the protesters as these heroic freedom fighters, almost like those who marched in Tiananmen Square peacefully.
Yeah, it's a dilemma. The overall cause is great, but the tactics used by some, and I don't actually know what their cause is, seems absolutely unacceptable. But is there any... In fact, I talked to former Chief Secretary Anson Chan just yesterday, who was initially one of the big protest leaders when it was quite peaceful, and she seemed very troubled by the violence. Is there any sign at all that the protest leaders now, the younger ones, are going to turn down that violence?
Yeah, I do believe that as a result of the failed siege at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University in Hung Hom yesterday, and that was a chaotic period over several days with children as young as 11 being enticed into that university and becoming part of that protest in there with, again, the production of Molotov cocktails, any of which could have killed civilians or police who are part of a cordon. But as a result of the failure of that siege and the police holding the line and enduring the attacks, oral as well as petrol bombing, I think that the protesters have realised that the game is up. They've been demanding an amnesty for some time. They want to be completely exonerated for all of their wanton acts of violence and public and private property destruction. But they want to be cleared themselves of any potential charges. They don't want to have to face any prosecution. They want to get out of jail free card. They don't even want to go to be arrested, whereas they want the police to be subjected to a far-reaching commission of inquiry. Now, the government has said it's never going to happen. If we want to uphold the rule of law in Hong Kong, then there won't be this preferential treatment by the protesters, notwithstanding some of the media's depiction of them as these brave Democrats fighting for their rights. So as a result of that, I suspect that the tensions are easing.
That said, I have to think that I'd be worried too if my police records were going to be in the hands of China, particularly when it takes over later. So I wouldn't be queuing to go to the police station either. But still, you make some excellent points there, Headley. It's such a shame that such a great cause is ending in this kind of violence, and I can only predict bad things for what's coming next. Headley Thomas, your report today in the Australian was fantastic. I urge people to read your reports tomorrow in the Australian as well. Thank you so much indeed for your time.